Broken, Trust Avenged. Lady Emmeline of Hymir had no desire to wed a stranger, so she fled into the night only to be caught in the arms of Sir Hugh Fitzellen, the very knight sent to bring her back. He held her fast, his breath warm against her ear. "Running, my lady?" he murmured. "Wherever you go, I will find you." Chapter 1. The Flight of the Falcon. The tapestries lining the cold stone walls of Hymir Castle seemed to mock Lady Emmeline with their vibrant depictions of courtly love and chivalrous knights. Here, in the heart of her ancestral home, she felt more a prisoner than a lady. The heavy brocade of her gown, a masterpiece of silver thread and deep crimson velvet, felt like a gilded cage. Tonight, it was not a symbol of her noble status, but a shroud, burying her beneath the weight of her impending marriage to Lord Alaric, a man she had never met, a man rumored to be as cold and unyielding as the northern mountains he called home. Her fingers, usually adorned with rings passed down through generations of Hymir women, were bare. She had stripped them off one by one, placing them carefully on the carved oak dressing table, each clink a tiny act of rebellion. The emerald, a gift from her mother, she hesitated over the longest. Her mother, a woman who had understood the silent language of a woman's heart, would have understood this desperate flight, would have approved of it even. Emmeline glanced at the small, intricately carved wooden falcon perched on her windowsill. A gift from her brother, Thomas, before he'd ridden off to war, a lifetime ago it seemed. "Fly free, little sister," he'd said, his youthful face already hardened by the responsibilities of their lineage. The falcon, with its wings outstretched, seemed to embody the freedom she craved, the freedom that was about to be stolen from her. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, skeletal shadows across the chamber. The hour was late, the castle asleep. Even the ever-present guards, usually pacing the corridors with their rhythmic, heavy tread, were likely lulled into a drowsy vigilance by the late hour and the crackling hearth in the guardroom. It was now or never. She had packed little, a small pouch containing a few coins, a silver comb, a worn leather-bound book of prayers, and a dagger, its hilt cold against her palm. The dagger was more for comfort than any real expectation of using it. She was a lady of Hymir, not a warrior. But the weight of it, hidden in the folds of her simple, dark woolen cloak, gave her a sliver of courage. The escape route had been planned meticulously over weeks of sleepless nights, fueled by desperation and a growing sense of claustrophobia. A forgotten servant's passage, hidden behind a loose tapestry in the old library, led to a postern gate rarely used, its lock rusted and weak. She had bribed a young stable boy, a lad with wide, innocent eyes and a yearning for adventure, to leave a horse saddled and waiting just beyond the gate. He'd sworn on his mother's grave to keep her secret, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. Moving with a practiced grace that belied her inner turmoil, Emmeline slipped through the shadows, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The familiar scent of beeswax and old parchment in the library offered a fleeting moment of comfort, a reminder of happier times spent lost in the pages of ancient tales. But the comfort was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline as she reached the tapestry, her fingers fumbling with the heavy fabric. The passage was narrow and dusty, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Cobwebs brushed against her face, and she stifled a gasp, imagining the unseen creatures that might lurk in the darkness. She pressed onward, her hand gripping the dagger, her senses on high alert. The postern gate creaked open with a groan that seemed to echo through the silent night. She slipped through, holding her breath, expecting at any moment to hear the shout of a guard, the clang of steel. But only the rustling of leaves in the nearby forest and the distant hoot of an owl greeted her. The horse, a sturdy gray mare named Whisper, was waiting, just as promised. The stable boy was nowhere to be seen, but a small, roughly drawn map was tucked into the saddlebag, showing the route to a nearby village where she hoped to find passage on a merchant ship heading south. Emmeline mounted Whisper, her hands shaking as she gathered the reins. She looked back at the imposing silhouette of Hymir Castle, its towers piercing the night sky. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her: grief, regret, but also a fierce, exhilarating sense of liberation. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known: her family, her title, her security. But she was also escaping a gilded cage, a future devoid of love and choice. She urged Whisper forward, turning her back on Hymir and riding towards the dark embrace of the forest. The trees loomed around her, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers, blocking out the moonlight. The forest floor was uneven, strewn with rocks and fallen branches, and the air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. She had ridden for what felt like hours, her body aching, her mind racing, when she heard the unmistakable sound of pursuing hooves. Her blood ran cold. They had discovered her escape sooner than she had anticipated. Fear, sharp and primal, clawed at her throat. She urged Whisper to a faster pace, pushing the mare to her limits. But the pursuing hooves were gaining on her, the sound growing closer, more insistent. She could hear the snorting of horses, the creak of leather, the muffled voices of men. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a knight clad in gleaming armor, his horse a powerful black stallion that seemed to devour the ground beneath its hooves. He rode with a skill and determination that left no doubt as to his purpose. He was not merely a guard, he was a hunter. Emmeline pulled back on the reins, Whisper rearing in fright. The knight blocked her path, his face obscured by the shadow of his helmet, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. He reached out, his gloved hand closing around her arm with a grip that was both firm and surprisingly gentle. "Running, my lady?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. His breath, warm against her ear, carried the scent of leather and steel, and something else, something indefinably masculine and unsettling. "Wherever you go, I will find you." It was Sir Hugh Fitzalan. The knight was legendary, her intended's most trusted man. He had found her, and in his grasp, she felt strangely vulnerable, like a bird caught in the snare. She swallowed down the dryness of her throat, the knot of fear a cold weight. Chapter 2. A Knight's Pursuit. Sir Hugh Fitzalan dismounted with a fluid grace that belied the weight of his armor. The moonlight glinted off the polished steel, casting him in an almost ethereal light. He stood before Emmeline, a towering figure of strength and authority, yet his eyes, now visible beneath the raised visor of his helmet, held a surprising depth of what? Not anger, not quite. Something more complex, a mixture of duty, perhaps, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. "My Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice still low, but with a hint of formality that grated on her nerves. "Your flight is ill-advised. Lord Alaric awaits his bride." Emmeline straightened in the saddle, trying to summon some semblance of the dignity befitting her rank, despite the tremor in her hands. "I am no one's bride," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. "I will not be forced into a marriage I do not desire." A flicker of something amusement crossed Hugh's face. "Forced? I was under the impression that the alliance between Hymir and Northwood was agreed upon by both families. A matter of mutual benefit." "Benefit for whom?" Emmeline challenged, her gaze unwavering. "For my father, eager to secure his northern borders? For Lord Alaric, seeking to expand his influence? What of my benefit, Sir Knight? What of my happiness?" Hugh was silent for a moment, his gaze searching hers. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the soft whinnying of the horses and the distant rush of a hidden stream. "Happiness is a fleeting thing, my lady," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost regretful. "Duty is what endures. Loyalty to one's family, to one's lord, to one's land. These are the bonds that hold our world together. And what of loyalty to oneself?" Emmeline countered, her voice trembling with a mixture of defiance and despair. "Must I sacrifice my own heart, my own future, for the sake of these bonds?" Hugh's hand, still resting lightly on her arm, tightened almost imperceptibly. Sometimes, my lady, sacrifice is the price of honor. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and resonant. Emmeline felt a surge of frustration, a desperate need to break free from his grasp, from his words, from the suffocating weight of his expectations. Honor? She scoffed, pulling her arm away. Is it honorable to force a woman into a loveless marriage? To treat her as a mere pawn in a game of power? Hugh stepped back, his expression unreadable. I am but a knight, my lady. I follow my lord's commands. It is not my place to question his decisions. But it is your place to enforce them? Emmeline's voice was laced with bitterness. To hunt me down like a runaway beast? To drag me back to a life I despise? Hugh's silence was her answer. He reached for Whisper's reins, his movements calm and deliberate. Come, my lady. We must return to Hymir. Emmeline felt a surge of panic. She couldn't go back. She wouldn't. She had come too far, risked too much, to surrender now. No, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I will not go back. She spurred Whisper forward, attempting to ride past him, to escape back into the darkness of the forest. But Hugh was too quick. He caught Whisper's bridle, halting the mare with ease. Do not make this more difficult than it needs to be, my lady, he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. Resistance is futile. Emmeline looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint of compassion. But she found only unwavering resolve. He was a knight, bound by his oath, his duty. He would not be swayed by her pleas, her tears, her defiance. Or would he? A sudden thought, a desperate gamble, flashed through her mind. She remembered the stories she had heard about Sir Hugh Fitzalan, whispers of a past shrouded in tragedy, a lost love, a broken heart. He was known for his unwavering loyalty, his courage in battle, but also for a certain melancholy, a shadow that seemed to cling to him despite his formidable reputation. Could she reach that hidden part of him, the part that might understand her own yearning for freedom, for love? It was a long shot, a desperate plea to a man she barely knew, but it was the only weapon she had left. Sir Knight, she said, her voice softer now, pleading, have you never loved? Have you never known the pain of a heart denied its desire? His eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even pain, crossing his face. He released Whisper's bridle, his hand dropping to his side. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. He stared at her, his jaw tight. The lines around his eyes, etched by years of sun and battle, seemed deeper now, more pronounced. He looked away, towards the dark forest, as if searching for an answer in the rustling leaves. Love, he finally said, his voice rough, almost a whisper, is a luxury a knight cannot always afford. He turned his gaze back to her, and in that moment, Emmeline saw not the stoic knight, but a man haunted by a past he could not escape. And she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile ember in the darkness. Chapter 3. Chains of Duty. The fragile ember of hope flickered and threatened to die as Hugh's gaze hardened, the momentary vulnerability replaced by the familiar mask of duty. He seemed to gather himself, drawing his shoulders back, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. The movement was subtle, almost unconscious, but it spoke volumes. He was a knight first, a man second. My lady, he said, his voice regaining its formal tone, your personal feelings, while understandable, cannot alter the course of events. The alliance between Hymir and Northwood is vital. Your marriage to Lord Alaric will secure peace and prosperity for both our lands. Emmeline felt a surge of despair. She had tried to reach him, to appeal to his humanity, but it seemed she had failed. He was too deeply entrenched in his duty, his loyalty to his lord blinding him to her plight. Peace and prosperity, she echoed, her voice laced with sarcasm. At what cost? My freedom? My happiness? Am I nothing more than a bargaining chip in this alliance? Hugh flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but enough for Emmeline to notice. He was not entirely immune to her words, to her pain. But he quickly recovered, his expression hardening once more. You are a lady of Hymir, he said, his voice firm. Your duty is to your family, to your people. Personal desires must be subordinated to the greater good. The greater good? Emmeline laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the silent forest. Whose good, Sir Knight? Yours? Lord Alaric's? My father's? Where do I fit into this equation? Hugh remained silent, his gaze unwavering. He offered no comfort, no reassurance, only the cold, hard reality of her situation. She was trapped, bound by chains of duty forged by tradition and expectation. He reached for Whisper's reins again, his movements slow and deliberate. We must return, my lady. The longer we delay, the more difficult our journey will become. Emmeline knew he was right. Dawn was approaching, the sky beginning to lighten in the east. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming in the darkness, would soon become a dangerous place, filled with potential threats. And the longer she remained at large, the greater the risk of her father sending out more search parties, making her escape even more impossible. But the thought of returning to Hymir, to the suffocating confines of her gilded cage, filled her with a sense of dread. She couldn't face it, not yet. She needed more time to think, to plan, to find some way out of this impossible situation. Please, Sir Knight, she said, her voice pleading, desperate. Just a little more time. Give me until sunrise. Let me say goodbye to this freedom, however fleeting. Hugh hesitated, his hand hovering over Whisper's reins. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of her plea. He was a warrior, trained to anticipate deception, to see through lies. But he was also a man, capable of empathy, of understanding. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the desperation in her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. He saw not a rebellious runaway, but a woman facing an impossible choice, a woman torn between duty and desire. He sighed, a long, slow exhalation of breath. Very well, my lady, he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. Until sunrise. But then we must go. Emmeline nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She had bought herself a few precious hours, a brief reprieve from the inevitable. But what would she do with them? How could she possibly change her fate in such a short time? She dismounted Whisper, her legs stiff and aching from the long ride. She walked a few paces away from Hugh, towards the edge of a small clearing where a stream gurgled over smooth stones. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and the first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky with hues of pink and gold. She sat down on a moss-covered rock, her gaze fixed on the flowing water. The sound was soothing, calming, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within her. She closed her eyes, trying to clear her mind, to focus, to find some inspiration, some glimmer of hope in the gathering light. She thought of her brother, Thomas, and the wooden falcon he had given her. Fly free, little sister. His words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the spirit she had almost lost, the spirit of independence and defiance that had driven her to flee Hymir. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the rising sun, its golden rays piercing through the trees, illuminating the forest with a warm, ethereal glow. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't give up. She wouldn't surrender. She would fight for her freedom, for her happiness, even if it meant defying the expectations of her family, her society, her world. She stood up, her resolve strengthened, her heart filled with a newfound determination. She turned to face Hugh, who was watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable. She looked at this man, bound by his own chains of duty, and decided that she would find a way, however slim, to free herself, and perhaps a way for them both to be released. The sunrise was breathtaking, the sky aflame. It was both an ending and a beginning. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Darkwood. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, not exactly. It was a weighted silence, filled with unspoken thoughts, unasked questions, and the lingering tension of their earlier confrontation. Emmeline watched the sunrise, its beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart, while Hugh remained a stoic figure by the horses, his presence a constant reminder of her impending return. He had moved with a surprising quietness for a man in full armor, a testament to his years of training. He tended to the horses, checking their saddles and offering them water from a small stream, his movements efficient and practiced. He seemed to be giving her space, allowing her this brief respite, but she knew it was a temporary reprieve. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the trees, Emmeline decided to break the silence. She needed to understand him, to understand the forces that drove him, if she had any hope of finding a way out of this predicament. "Sir Hugh," she said, her voice soft but clear, "you spoke of duty, of loyalty. Tell me, to whom do you owe your greatest allegiance?" He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "To my lord, Alaric of Northwood," he replied without hesitation. "I have sworn an oath to serve him, to protect his interests, to obey his commands." "And what of your own interests, Sir Knight?" Emmeline pressed, her gaze unwavering. "Do they not matter? Do you have no desires, no ambitions, beyond serving your lord?" Hugh's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering in his cheek. He looked away, towards the forest, as if searching for an answer in the rustling leaves. "A knight's life is one of service," he said finally, his voice low. "Personal desires are secondary." "But not non-existent," Emmeline countered, stepping closer to him. "You are a man, not a machine. You must have feelings, hopes, dreams." He turned back to face her, his eyes, usually so guarded, now held a flicker of something vulnerability. "Dreams are for children, my lady," he said, his voice rough. "Reality is for men." Emmeline sensed a hidden pain in his words, a deep-seated sorrow that he kept carefully concealed beneath his stoic exterior. She remembered the whispers she had heard about his past, the rumors of a lost love, a tragedy that had shaped him into the man he was today. "And what of love, Sir Knight?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Is that also a childish dream?" His eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even pain, crossing his face. He took a step back, as if her words had struck a nerve. "Love," he began, then hesitated, his voice trailing off. He looked away again, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Love is a battlefield, my lady, and I have already fought my war." Emmeline felt a pang of sympathy for him. She understood now, at least in part, the source of his melancholy, the reason for his unwavering devotion to duty. He had loved and lost, and the pain of that loss had hardened him, made him wary of opening his heart again. She wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but she knew it was not her place. He was a knight, a warrior, and she was a runaway bride, his prisoner. There could be no true connection between them, only the strained relationship of captor and captive. But still, she couldn't help but feel a sense of kinship with him. They were both trapped, in their own way, by the expectations of their society, by the chains of duty and obligation. "We are all prisoners, in one way or another, Sir Knight," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "Bound by chains we did not choose." Hugh looked at her, his eyes searching hers. He seemed to see her, truly see her, for the first time. Not as a rebellious runaway, but as a woman trapped by circumstance, a woman yearning for freedom. He said nothing, but in his silence, Emmeline sensed a shift in his demeanor, a subtle softening of his stance. He still held her captive, but perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to understand her plight. The sound of approaching horses broke the silence, shattering the fragile connection that had formed between them. Hugh stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. "Riders approach," he said, his voice sharp, alert. "We must prepare to leave." Emmeline felt a surge of disappointment. The brief moment of understanding, of shared vulnerability, was over. They were back to being captor and captive, their roles defined by duty and obligation. She was still the runaway, the falcon desperate for the wind. He was the hunter. And the hunt, she realized, was far from over. Chapter 5. The Baron's Decree. The approaching riders were not enemies, as Hugh had initially feared, but a small contingent of Lord Alaric's men, led by a stern-faced captain named Gareth. They were heavily armed and armored, their horses lathered and weary, evidence of a hard ride. Gareth dismounted, his armor clinking, and approached Hugh with a curt bow. "Sir Hugh," he said, his voice rough, "Lord Alaric sends his greetings and commands your immediate return to Hymir. The Baron is displeased with the Lady Emmeline's delay." Displeased was an understatement, Emmeline knew. Her father, Baron Edric of Hymir, was a man of fierce temper and unwavering pride. Her flight was not only a personal affront to him but a public humiliation, a stain on the family honor. He would not take it lightly. Hugh nodded, his expression unreadable. "We were about to depart, Captain," he said. The Lady Emmeline required rest. Gareth's eyes flickered to Emmeline, his gaze cold and assessing. He clearly doubted Hugh's explanation, but he was too disciplined to question a knight of Sir Hugh's standing. "Lord Alaric awaits," Gareth repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "He grows impatient." Emmeline felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She had hoped for more time, a chance to escape, to find some way out of this impossible situation. But it seemed her fate was sealed. She was to be dragged back to Hymir, to face her father's wrath and the unwanted marriage to Lord Alaric. She looked at Hugh, searching for any sign of what? Sympathy? Regret? But his face was a mask of stoic duty. He was a knight, bound by his oath, and he would carry out his lord's commands, regardless of his personal feelings. She mounted Whisper, her movements stiff and resigned. She did not resist as Hugh took the mare's reins, leading her towards the waiting men. She felt like a lamb being led to the slaughter, her spirit broken, her hope extinguished. The journey back to Hymir was a blur of exhaustion and despair. Emmeline rode in silence, her mind numb, her body aching. She barely noticed the passing scenery, the rolling hills and dense forests, the occasional villages and farmsteads. She was lost in her own thoughts, her own fears, her own sense of impending doom. As they approached Hymir Castle, its towering walls and imposing battlements looming before them, Emmeline felt a surge of panic. She couldn't face it, not yet. She wasn't ready. She looked at Hugh, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just a few more minutes. Let me compose myself." Hugh hesitated, his hand tightening on Whisper's reins. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Very well, my lady," he said, his voice low. "But only a few minutes. We cannot delay any longer." He led her to a small, secluded grove of trees just outside the castle walls. The air was cool and quiet, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of voices from within the castle. Emmeline dismounted Whisper, her legs trembling. She walked a few paces away from Hugh, towards a small stream that gurgled over smooth stones. She sat down on a moss-covered rock, her gaze fixed on the flowing water. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart, to still the trembling in her hands. She needed to find some inner strength, some courage, to face what awaited her. She thought of her mother, a woman of grace and resilience, who had faced her own trials with dignity and fortitude. She thought of her brother, Thomas, a brave and honorable knight, who had taught her the importance of courage and self-reliance. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the towering walls of Hymir Castle. It was her home, her ancestral seat, the place where she had spent her childhood, where she had known both joy and sorrow. It was also her prison, the place where her freedom was to be taken from her. She stood up, her resolve hardening. She would not cower. She would not beg. She would face her father and Lord Alaric, with her head held high. She would not let them break her spirit. She turned to face Hugh, who was watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable. "I am ready," she said, her voice clear and steady. He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. He mounted his horse, then reached down to help her on to Whisper. As they rode towards the castle gates, Emmeline knew that her life was about to change forever. She was entering a battle, not of swords and shields, but of wills and hearts. And she was determined to fight, even if it meant losing everything. The gates opened, and they rode into the courtyard. All eyes were upon her. She saw her father first, his face a thunderstorm. Her fight had begun. Chapter 6. Scars of the Past. The courtyard of Hymir was a scene of controlled chaos. Servants scurried about, carrying supplies and attending to horses, while guards stood at attention, their faces grim and watchful. All eyes were on Emmeline as she rode in, her arrival the culmination of hours of anxious waiting. Baron Edric stood at the top of the steps leading to the great hall, his figure imposing in a dark red tunic and fur-lined cloak. His face was, as Emmeline had predicted, a thunderstorm. His eyes, usually a warm hazel, were now cold and hard, his mouth set in a thin, unforgiving line. Beside him stood Lord Alaric, a man of similar height and build, but with a colder, more calculating demeanor. His hair was as dark as a raven's wing, his eyes a piercing blue that seemed to see through her. Emmeline dismounted whisper, her movements stiff and deliberate. She met her father's gaze, her chin held high, her expression defiant. She would not show fear, not in front of him, not in front of Alaric. "Emmeline," Baron Edric said, his voice a low growl that echoed through the courtyard. "You have disgraced yourself and this family. Your flight was an act of treachery." "Treachery?" Emmeline countered, her voice surprisingly steady. "I sought only to avoid a marriage I did not desire. Is that treachery, father? Or is it merely self-preservation?" Baron Edric's face reddened, his anger barely contained. "You are betrothed to Lord Alaric," he said, his voice rising. "The alliance has been agreed upon. Your duty is to obey. My duty is to myself, as well," Emmeline retorted, her voice laced with defiance. "I will not be a pawn in your political games." Lord Alaric stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Emmeline. "Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, "your concerns are understandable. But the benefits of this alliance outweigh any personal inconvenience." Emmeline turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "Inconvenience?" she echoed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call it, my lord? To be forced to wed a man I do not love, a man I do not even know?" Alaric's expression remained impassive, his eyes cold and calculating. "Love is a fleeting fancy, my lady," he said. "Duty and loyalty are what endure." Emmeline felt a surge of despair. She was trapped, surrounded by men who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end, a tool to be used for their own gain. She looked at Hugh, who stood silently beside his horse, his expression unreadable. He had brought her back, delivered her to her fate. He was a knight, bound by his oath, and he had fulfilled his duty. But in that moment, as their eyes met, Emmeline saw something flicker in his gaze, a hint of regret? Sympathy? Or was it merely her imagination, a desperate attempt to find some solace in this hopeless situation? Baron Edric, sensing her defiance, stepped closer, his voice a low threat. "You will obey, Emmeline," he said, "or you will face the consequences." Emmeline knew what those consequences would be. Imprisonment, perhaps. Disinheritance. Or worse. She was at her father's mercy, and he was not known for his compassion. She looked at Alaric, his cold, calculating gaze unwavering. She looked at her father, his face a mask of anger and disappointment. She looked at Hugh, his expression unreadable. She was alone, surrounded by enemies, her fate hanging in the balance. Suddenly, Hugh stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. "My Lord Baron," he said, "may I have a word with the Lady Emmeline in private?" Baron Edric hesitated, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He looked at Alaric, who gave a slight nod. "Very well, Sir Knight," Baron Edric said, his voice grudging. "But be brief. The wedding will proceed as planned." Hugh bowed his head in acknowledgement. He turned to Emmeline, his eyes filled with what? Concern? Urgency? "My lady," he said, his voice low, "please come with me." He led her away from the courtyard towards a small, secluded garden at the back of the castle. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the scent of roses and lavender. It was a place of peace and tranquility, a stark contrast to the tension and turmoil of the courtyard. Once they were alone, Hugh turned to face her, his expression serious. "My lady," he said, his voice urgent, "you must listen to me. Your defiance will only make things worse. You must acquiesce, at least for now." Emmeline looked at him, her eyes filled with confusion and suspicion. "Acquiesce?" she echoed.
"Why?"
"What are you suggesting?" Hugh hesitated, his gaze searching hers. He seemed to be struggling with his own conscience, his own sense of duty. I cannot explain everything now," he said, his voice low. "But I believe there may be another way. A way to avoid this marriage, without further endangering yourself." Emmeline's heart skipped a beat. Hope, a fragile, flickering ember, ignited within her. "What way?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell me." Hugh looked around, as if to make sure they were not overheard. He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "There are secrets, my lady," he said. "Secrets about Lord Alaric, about this alliance, secrets that could change everything." He paused, then looked back to her urgently. "I need time," he continued in the same quiet tone, "to uncover the truth. But I need your cooperation. You must pretend to accept the marriage. Gain their trust. Buy us time." He was asking her to play a dangerous game, to walk a tightrope between compliance and defiance. He was asking her to trust him, a man who had hunted her down, a man who served the very lord she was trying to escape. She knew the risks. She could get caught in their web.
Betrayed.
Yet, looking at the night, she also felt something. A connection.
His own pain.
His own battles. It was the ultimate gamble. Her life, in the hands of the man holding her captive. Chapter 7. A Glimmer of Trust. Emmeline stared at Hugh, her mind reeling. His words were a lifeline, a fragile thread of hope in the overwhelming darkness of her situation. But they were also a terrifying proposition. To pretend acceptance, to deceive her father and Lord Alaric, was a dangerous game, one that could have dire consequences if she were discovered. "Trust you?" she said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes searching his. "You who brought me back here. You who served the man I am to be forced to marry." Hugh met her gaze, his expression earnest, his eyes filled with a sincerity she hadn't seen before. "I know it is a great deal to ask, my lady," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But I swear to you on my honor as a knight that I am not your enemy." "Then whose enemy are you, Sir Knight?" Emmeline challenged, her voice still hesitant, but with a flicker of curiosity. "Lord Alaric's? My father's? Whose secrets are you seeking to uncover?" Hugh hesitated, his gaze shifting, as if weighing his words carefully. "There are forces at play, my lady," he said, his voice cryptic, "forces that you are not yet aware of. This alliance, it is not what it seems." "Then tell me," Emmeline pleaded, her voice rising slightly. "Tell me what is going on. I deserve to know the truth." Hugh shook his head. "I cannot, not yet. It is too dangerous. But I promise you, I will reveal everything in time. For now, you must trust me. You must play your part." Emmeline felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, suspicion, but also a glimmer of hope, a flicker of trust. She looked into Hugh's eyes, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of betrayal. But she found only sincerity, a deep-seated conviction that seemed to emanate from his very core. She remembered the whispers she had heard about him, the rumors of his lost love, his broken heart. He was a man of honor, a man of integrity, despite his unwavering loyalty to his lord. Could he be trusted? Could she risk everything on his word? She thought of the alternative of forced marriage to a cold, calculating man, a life devoid of love and choice. She thought of her father's wrath, of Alaric's ambition, of the suffocating confines of her gilded cage. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She had nothing to lose, and everything to gain. "Very well, Sir Knight," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "I will play your game. I will pretend to accept the marriage. But I swear to you, if you betray me, if you use me for your own ends, I will not betray you, my lady," Hugh interrupted, his voice earnest. "You have my word, and I will do everything in my power to protect you." Emmeline nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. They were allies now, bound by a shared secret, a shared purpose. They were playing a dangerous game, walking a tightrope between deception and discovery. But they were in it together. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice practical, her mind already racing, planning, strategizing. "For now," Hugh said, "you must act the part of the compliant bride. Attend the feasts, smile for your father and for the groom. Participate in the preparations. Show no sign of resistance, no hint of your true feelings. Gain their trust, so I will have the freedom I need to act without raising suspicion." "And what will you be doing?" Emmeline asked, her curiosity piqued. Hugh's expression became guarded. "I will be investigating," he said vaguely. "Asking questions, seeking answers. There are inconsistencies, rumors, whispers that I need to follow up on."
"Whispers about what?"
Emmeline pressed, her voice insistent. Hugh hesitated. "Whispers about Lord Alaric's past," he said finally, his voice low. "About his methods. About the true nature of his ambition." Emmeline felt a chill run down her spine. She had sensed something dark, something dangerous, about Lord Alaric. Now, it seemed her instincts were confirmed. "Be careful, Sir Knight," she said, her voice filled with concern. "If Alaric suspects, he will not suspect," Hugh interrupted, his voice confident. "I am his most trusted knight. He believes in my loyalty implicitly." Emmeline looked at him, a mixture of admiration and apprehension in her eyes. He was playing a dangerous game, risking his own life to uncover the truth. He was a knight, yes, but he was also a man of courage, of integrity, of honor. A glimmer of trust, genuine and warm, blossomed within her. She had made the right decision, she realized.
She had chosen the right ally.
And perhaps, just perhaps, they might actually succeed. The sun had broken through the clouds and dappled the small clearing, casting a sense of serenity. But beneath this serenity, danger lurked. Chapter 8. The Tournament of Shadows. The days leading up to the wedding were a carefully choreographed dance of deception. Emmeline played the part of the compliant bride, attending feasts, smiling at Lord Alaric, and participating in the endless preparations with a grace that belied the turmoil raging within her. She endured the endless fittings for her wedding gown, a masterpiece of white silk and intricate embroidery, feeling like a doll being dressed for a performance she didn't want to give. She learned to deflect Alaric's cold, probing questions with vague answers and practiced smiles, masking her true feelings beneath a veneer of polite indifference. She even managed to exchange pleasantries with her father, who seemed to have softened slightly, his anger replaced by a grudging acceptance of her apparent submission. But beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Every glance, every word, every gesture was fraught with hidden meaning. Emmeline felt like she was walking on eggshells, constantly aware that one wrong move could expose her deception and bring everything crashing down around her. Hugh, meanwhile, remained a constant presence, his watchful eyes following her every move. He was Alaric's shadow, always at his lord's side, his loyalty seemingly unwavering. But Emmeline knew better. She saw the subtle signals, the fleeting glances, the coded messages that passed between them, a silent communication that spoke volumes. He was working, she knew, investigating, uncovering the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of this carefully constructed alliance. But he revealed nothing to her, keeping his discoveries close to his chest, protecting her from the danger of knowing too much. The centerpiece of the pre-wedding festivities was a grand tournament, a display of martial prowess and chivalrous spectacle. Knights from across the realm gathered at Hymir, eager to compete for glory and honor. Alaric, a skilled warrior himself, was expected to participate, and Emmeline knew that she would be expected to watch, to cheer him on, to play the part of the adoring bride-to-be. The tournament grounds were a riot of color and sound. Banners fluttered in the breeze, trumpets blared, and the crowd roared with excitement as the knights, clad in gleaming armor, clashed in a series of justs and melees. Emmeline sat in the raised viewing stand, beside her father and Lord Alaric, her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She watched as Hugh, mounted on his powerful black stallion, entered the lists. He was a formidable figure, his skill and courage evident in every movement. He unseated several opponents with ease, his lance striking true, his horsemanship impeccable. Emmeline found herself holding her breath each time he rode, her heart filled with a strange mixture of pride
and fear.
She knew he was risking his life, not just in the tournament, but in the larger, more dangerous game they were playing. During a lull in the jousting, Alaric turned to Emmeline, his eyes cold and assessing. "Sir Hugh is a valiant knight," he said, his voice smooth, "loyal and skilled. He will make a fine champion for Alliance." Emmeline forced a smile. "Indeed, my lord," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He is a credit to your service." Alaric's gaze lingered on her, as if searching for any sign of deception. "You seem fond of him, Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice laced with a hint of suspicion. Emmeline's heart skipped a beat. She had to be careful. "I admire his skill and courage, my lord," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "As any lady would." Alaric seemed satisfied with her answer, but Emmeline knew she had narrowly avoided a dangerous trap. She had to be more careful, more guarded, in her interactions with him. As the tournament progressed, Emmeline noticed a pattern in Hugh's fights. He seemed to be deliberately avoiding direct confrontation with Alaric, choosing instead to focus on lesser opponents. It was a subtle strategy, almost imperceptible, but Emmeline understood its significance. He was protecting himself, avoiding any situation that might force him to choose between his loyalty to Alaric and his secret alliance with her. He was walking a tightrope, balancing his duty with his deception. The final joust of the day pitted Hugh against a formidable knight from a rival house, a man known for his ruthlessness and skill. The crowd roared as the two knights charged at each other, their lances lowered, their horses thundering across the field. The impact was deafening, the sound of splintering wood and clashing steel echoing through the stands. Both knights were unseated, falling heavily to the ground. Emmeline gasped, her heart leaping to her throat. She watched in horror as Hugh lay motionless on the field, his body limp, his helmet askew. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, slowly, painfully, Hugh rose to his feet. He was bruised and battered, but he was alive. Emmeline felt a wave of relief wash over her, so intense it almost brought her to her knees. She realized, in that moment, that her feelings for Hugh were more complex, more profound, than she had dared to admit. He was more than just an ally. He was something more. Something far more dangerous, but far more necessary, to her heart. The crowd were cheering and stomping. It was deafening. But she could only stare down at the knight, her heart suddenly hammering in her chest. Chapter 9. Secrets in the Cloister. The injury Hugh sustained in the tournament, while not severe, provided a convenient excuse for him to withdraw from the remaining festivities. He was confined to his chambers, ostensibly to recover, but Emily knew that this was also an opportunity for him to pursue his investigations without the constant scrutiny of Lord Alaric. She visited him under the guise of offering her concern and gratitude for his bravery, bringing with her a soothing balm for his bruises, prepared by the castle's herbalist. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of herbs and beeswax. Hugh lay in bed, his arm bandaged, his face pale but his eyes alert. "My lady," he said, his voice hoarse, "you should not have risked coming here." "If Alaric were to suspect, he will not suspect," Emmeline interrupted, her voice firm. "I am playing my part. He believes I am concerned for his champion's well-being." Hugh smiled weakly. "You are a skilled actress, my lady," he said. "But be careful. Alaric is not easily fooled." Emmeline placed the bomb on a small table beside the bed. "Tell me," she said, her voice low and urgent. "What have you discovered? What are these secrets you spoke of?" Hugh hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "I have been delving into Lord Alaric's past," he said, his voice cautious. "And I have found disturbing evidence." "Evidence of what?" Emmeline pressed, her heart pounding with anticipation. Hugh leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Evidence of treachery," he said. "Of a plot to overthrow the king." Emmeline gasped, her eyes widening in shock. "Overthrow the king?" she echoed.
But why?
What would Alaric gain from such a reckless act? "Power," Hugh said simply. "He seeks to expand his influence, to control the north and, eventually, the entire realm. This marriage, it is merely a stepping stone to his ultimate goal." Emmeline felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected Alaric was ambitious, but she had never imagined he was capable of such treachery. She was not merely a pawn in a political game, she was a piece in a much larger, more dangerous conspiracy. "We must warn the king," she said, her voice urgent. "We must expose Alaric's plot before it is too late." Hugh shook his head. "We cannot, not yet. We have no proof, only suspicions and rumors. If we accuse Alaric without evidence, he will deny everything, and we will be branded as traitors." "Then what can we do?" Emmeline asked, her voice filled with despair. "We need proof," Hugh said. "Concrete evidence that will expose Alaric's treachery beyond any doubt. And I believe I know where to find it." "Where?" Emmeline asked, her voice eager. "The cloister of Saint Seraphina," Hugh said. "A secluded monastery, high in the mountains, where Alaric spent his youth. There are rumors of a hidden chamber, a place where he kept his secrets." "A monastery?" Emmeline echoed, her mind racing. "But how will we get there?" "It is miles from here, and heavily guarded, I presume." "I have a plan," Hugh said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "But it is risky, and it will require your cooperation." He outlined his plan, a daring and audacious scheme that involved sneaking out of the castle, traveling through treacherous terrain, and infiltrating a heavily guarded monastery. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance they had to expose Alaric's plot and prevent a bloody civil war. Emmeline listened, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. It was a dangerous undertaking, but she knew she had no choice. She was already deeply involved in this conspiracy, and she could not turn back now. "I will do it," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "I will help you." Hugh reached for hand, taking it. The touch was electric. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We leave at nightfall," Hugh added. He was looking at her now, their faces very close. The candlelight flickered, throwing shadows across the walls. There, in a quiet moment, between whispers and the weight of the world and secrets, something had changed. It was forbidden, dangerous, and, for the briefest moment, utterly inevitable. Chapter 10. The Price of Freedom. Nightfall cast long, eerie shadows across the castle walls as Emmeline and Hugh prepared for their clandestine departure. They dressed in simple, dark clothing, blending into the darkness like shadows themselves. Emmeline had traded her elaborate gowns for a sturdy woolen tunic and breeches, borrowed from a sympathetic stable boy, while Hugh wore his knightly armor, concealed beneath a dark cloak. They met in a deserted corridor, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Hugh carried a small pack containing supplies, food, water, and a few essential tools. He also carried his sword, its hilt gleaming in the dim light, a constant reminder of the dangers they faced. "Are you ready, my lady?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Emmeline nodded, her expression determined. "I am," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. They moved silently through the darkened corridors, avoiding the guards and servants, their footsteps barely making a sound on the stone floors. They reached the postern gate, the same one Emmeline had used during her first escape attempt, its lock now carefully oiled and loosened, thanks to Hugh's earlier preparations. They slipped through the gate, holding their breath, expecting at any moment to hear the shout of a guard, the clang of steel. But only the rustling of leaves in the nearby forest and the distant hoot of an owl greeted them. They mounted their horses, two sturdy steeds chosen for their endurance and quietness, and rode towards the dark embrace of the mountains. The journey was long and arduous, the terrain treacherous and unforgiving. They followed a winding path, known only to Hugh, that led them through dense forests, across rushing streams, and over steep, rocky inclines. The air grew colder as they climbed higher, the wind whipping around them, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Emmeline shivered, despite her warm cloak, her body aching from the long ride. But she did not complain, her spirit fueled by a fierce determination to reach their destination, to uncover the truth, to secure her freedom. Hugh rode beside her, his watchful eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, alert for any sign of danger. He was a silent, reassuring presence, his strength and courage a source of comfort to Emmeline. As they rode, they spoke little, their communication limited to essential instructions and whispered warnings. But in their silence, a deeper connection was forming, a bond forged by shared danger and mutual trust. They reached the cloister of St. Seraphina at dawn, its imposing stone walls rising from the mist-shrouded mountains like a fortress. The monastery was a place of silence and solitude, its inhabitants dedicated to prayer and contemplation, their lives governed by strict rules and ancient traditions. Hugh led Emmeline to a hidden crevice in the rocks, a secret entrance known only to a few. They dismounted their horses, leaving them concealed in a nearby grove of trees, and crept towards the crevice, their movements slow and cautious. They slipped through the narrow opening, finding themselves in a dark, damp tunnel that led deep into the heart of the monastery. The air was cold and heavy, the silence broken only by the dripping of water and the distant echo of chanting voices. Hugh produced a small oil lamp, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the tunnel walls. They moved forward, their footsteps echoing in the silence, their senses on high alert. They reached a large, stone chamber, its walls lined with ancient texts and religious artifacts. This was the monastery's library, a place of learning and contemplation, but also, according to Hugh, the location of the hidden chamber where Alaric's secrets were kept. Hugh began to search the room, his fingers tracing the spines of the books, his eyes scanning the walls for any sign of a hidden door or passage. Emmeline assisted him, her heart pounding with anticipation, her senses straining to detect any hint of discovery. After what seemed like an eternity, Hugh found a small, almost imperceptible crack in one of the stone walls, concealed behind a large tapestry depicting the life of Saint Seraphina. He pressed on the crack, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow, dark passage. This was it, the entrance to Alaric's secret chamber, the place where their fate would be decided. The price of freedom, Emmeline knew, was often steep. It demanded courage, sacrifice, and a willingness to confront the darkest of secrets. And as she stepped into that dark passage, she could feel the cold dread wrapping itself around her. But this time, at least she was not alone. Chapter 11. A Dance of Deception. The air inside the secret passage was thick with the smell of dust and decay, a testament to years of disuse. Hugh led the way, his oil lamp casting flickering shadows that danced on the rough-hewn stone walls. Emmeline followed close behind, her hand resting on the hilt of the dagger hidden beneath her tunic, her senses on high alert. The passage sloped downward, twisting and turning like a serpent's coil, leading them deeper into the bowels of the monastery. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the faint echo of their own footsteps. Emmeline felt a growing sense of claustrophobia, a primal fear of being trapped in this dark, confined space. After what seemed like an eternity, the passage opened into a small, circular chamber. The room was bare except for a single wooden chest, resting on a stone pedestal in the center of the floor. The chest was old and weathered, its wood cracked and stained, its iron bands rusted and corroded. Hugh approached the chest, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "This is it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Alaric's secrets." He knelt before the chest, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its lid. He tried to open it, but it was locked, its heavy iron clasp resisting his efforts. "Stand back, my lady," he said, his voice firm. He drew his sword, its polished steel gleaming in the lamplight. He brought the blade down on the lock, the sound of metal striking metal echoing through the chamber. The lock shattered, its broken pieces scattering across the floor. Hugh lifted the lid of the chest, his movements slow and deliberate. Emmeline held her breath, her heart pounding with anticipation. The chest contained a collection of documents, scrolls, and letters, all carefully preserved and meticulously organized. Hugh began to examine them, his eyes scanning the faded ink, his fingers tracing the intricate script. Emmeline watched him, her mind racing. What secrets did these documents hold? What evidence of Alaric's treachery would they reveal? As Hugh read, his expression grew grimmer, his brow furrowed in concentration. He muttered to himself, his voice barely audible, his words a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "It is worse than I feared," he said finally, his voice filled with a quiet fury. "Far worse." "What is it?" Emmeline asked, her voice urgent. "What have you found?" Hugh looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of horror and determination. "Alaric is not merely plotting to overthrow the king," he said, his voice low and intense. "He is planning to ignite a war that will engulf the entire realm." Emmeline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A war?" she echoed.
But why?
What could he possibly gain from such devastation? "Control," Hugh said simply. "He believes that by plunging the realm into chaos, he can seize power, establish himself as the supreme ruler, and reshape the kingdom according to his own twisted vision." He held up a letter, its seal bearing the crest of a powerful northern lord, a man known for his ruthlessness and ambition. "This is a letter of alliance," he said, his voice grim. "Alaric has secured the support of several key figures, promising them land, titles, and power in exchange for their loyalty." Emmeline felt a wave of despair wash over her. Alaric's plot was far more extensive, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. He was not merely a threat to her freedom, he was a threat to the entire realm. "We must stop him," she said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. "We must expose his treachery before it is too late." Hugh nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "We will," he said. "But we need to gather all the evidence, every document, every letter that proves his guilt. We need to present a case so strong, so irrefutable, that even his allies will abandon him." They spent the next hour carefully collecting the documents, organizing them, and preparing them for transport. They worked in silence, their movements efficient and purposeful, their minds focused on the task at hand. As they were about to leave, Emmeline noticed a small, intricately carved wooden box tucked away in a corner of the chest. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. It was locked, but the lock was small and fragile, easily broken with her dagger. She opened the box, her heart pounding with curiosity. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a silver locket, shaped like a heart, its surface engraved with a pair of intertwined initials, A.E. Emmeline gasped, her eyes widening in recognition. She knew those initials. They were Alaric's and her mother's. Her mother, who she believed dead, lost to illness. A truth, she now realized with horror, she had only ever taken for granted. The deception had cut too deep. Chapter 12. The Serpent's Kiss. The revelation struck Emmeline like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and reeling. Her mother alive? And involved with Alaric? It was impossible, unthinkable. Yet, the locket, with its familiar initials, was undeniable proof. She stared at the locket, her mind struggling to comprehend the implications of this discovery. Her mother, a woman she had always believed to be virtuous and loyal, had been involved in a secret affair with the very man who was now plotting to destroy the realm. "What does it mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes fixed on Hugh. Hugh, who had been watching her with concern, took the locket from her trembling hands. He examined it closely, his brow furrowed in thought. "It appears," he said slowly, his voice grave, "that your mother and Lord Alaric were involved. Before your mother's marriage to your father. But she died, Emmeline said, her voice filled with confusion and disbelief. Years ago. Of a fever. Hugh shook his head. That is what you were told, my lady, he said. But I suspect that is not the truth. He pointed to a small, almost imperceptible inscription on the back of the locket. It was a date that corresponded to a time long after her mother's supposed death. Emmeline felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her mother had not died. She had been hidden away,
Kept secret.
by Alaric.
Why?
She whispered, her voice barely audible. Why would he do such a thing? Hugh's expression was grim. I do not know, my lady, he said. But I suspect it is connected to his larger plot. Your mother may have known something that threatened his plans. Something he needed to silence. Emmeline felt a surge of anger, a burning rage that consumed her grief and confusion. Alaric had not only plotted to steal her freedom, to destroy the realm, he had also stolen her mother, lied to her, manipulated her entire life. We must find her, she said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. We must find my mother. Hugh nodded. We will, he said. But we must be careful. Alaric is a dangerous man. He will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens his plans. They gathered the remaining documents, placing them carefully in the pack, and prepared to leave the chamber. But as they were about to step back into the passage, they heard a sound of faint scraping noise, coming from the direction of the library. Hugh extinguished the lamp, plunging the chamber into darkness. They stood frozen, their senses on high alert, listening intently. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. Someone was outside the secret entrance. Someone was trying to get in. Hugh drew his sword, its polished steel gleaming faintly in the darkness. He motioned for Emmeline to stay behind him, his body shielding hers. The section of the wall that concealed the entrance began to move, slowly, silently. A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, imposing figure clad in the black robes of a monk. It was Lord Alaric. He stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the chamber, his expression cold and calculating. He held a small oil lamp in one hand and a dagger in the other. The dagger's blade was coated in a dark, viscous substance. Poison. Looking for something, my lady? He said, his voice smooth and menacing, a serpent's kiss. Perhaps this? He held up the locket, its silver surface gleaming in the lamplight. The locket that Emmeline had thought safely hidden in her tunic.
He must have found them, tracked them,
and known all along. He smiled, a cruel, predatory smile that sent a chill down Emmeline's spine. He knew everything. The game was over. The dance of deception had ended. And now, the real battle was about to begin. Chapter 13. Flames of Rebellion. Alaric's smile widened, a chilling display of triumph that sent a shiver of dread through Emmeline. He had anticipated their every move, played them like pieces on a chessboard, and now, he had them cornered. You are foolish to think you could deceive me, Alaric said, his voice dripping with contempt. I have eyes and ears everywhere, even within the ranks of my loyal knights. He glanced at Hugh, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Betrayal? Disappointment? Or merely cold calculation? Hugh stood his ground, his sword held steady, his expression defiant. He had known this moment might come, had prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation. He was a knight, sworn to serve his lord, but he was also a man of honor, bound by a higher duty to protect the innocent, to fight for justice, to defend the realm. You are a traitor, Alaric, Hugh said, his voice firm and unwavering. You have betrayed your oath, your king, your people. I will not stand by and watch you destroy everything. Alaric laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the chamber. Brave words, Sir Knight, he said, but ultimately futile. You are outnumbered, outmatched. You cannot win. He raised his dagger, its poisoned blade gleaming in the lamplight. It is time to end this charade, he said. Time to silence the inconvenient witnesses. He lunged at Emmeline, his movements swift and deadly. But Hugh was quicker. He intercepted Alaric's attack, his sword clashing against the dagger, the sound of metal striking metal ringing through the chamber. The two men fought, their blades flashing in the darkness, their bodies locked in a desperate struggle. Hugh was skilled and courageous, but Alaric was driven by a ruthless ambition, a dark power that made him a formidable opponent. Emmeline watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that Hugh was fighting not just for his own life, but for hers, for her mother's, for the future of the realm. She had to help him. She couldn't just stand there and watch him die. She drew her own dagger, the one she had carried since her flight from Hymir, its hilt cold against her palm. She was no warrior, but she was a lady of Hymir, and she would not cower in the face of danger. She circled around the struggling men, looking for an opening, a chance to strike. But Alaric was too quick, too aware of her presence. He anticipated her attack, parrying her blow with ease, his eyes mocking her feeble attempt. "You are no match for me, my lady," he sneered. "You are merely a pawn in this game, a pawn to be sacrificed." He turned his attention back to Hugh, pressing his attack with renewed ferocity. Hugh was tiring, his movements slowing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was losing ground, his defense weakening. Emmeline knew that she had to act, and act fast. She saw an opening, a brief moment when Alaric's back was turned. She lunged, her dagger aimed at his exposed flank. But Alaric was too quick. He sensed her movement, twisting his body at the last moment, avoiding her blade by a hair's breadth. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron, his eyes burning with rage. "You dare to defy me?" he hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You will pay for your insolence." He raised his dagger, its poisoned blade poised to strike. Emmeline closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, she heard a roar of anger, a clash of steel, and then silence. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding. Hugh stood over Alaric's fallen body, his sword dripping with blood. Alaric lay motionless on the floor, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, his dagger lying useless beside him. Hugh had saved her. He had killed Alaric. The immediate threat was over. But the larger battle, Emmeline knew, was far from finished. Alaric's allies were still out there, plotting, scheming, waiting for their chance to strike. The flames of rebellion had been ignited, and the realm was on the brink of war. The chamber had fallen silent again, other than the ragged breaths of Hugh. He was staring at her, his expression unreadable. "We must go," he stated, his voice raw. "Now." Chapter 14. Echoes of a Lost Love. They fled the cloister of Saint Seraphina, leaving behind the body of Lord Alaric and the secrets he had guarded so fiercely. They rode through the night, their horses' hooves pounding a frantic rhythm against the rocky terrain, their minds racing with the implications of what they had done. They had killed a powerful lord, a man who had commanded armies and influenced kings. They were now fugitives, hunted by Alaric's allies, branded as traitors and murderers. Their lives were in danger, their future uncertain. But they also carried with them the evidence of Alaric's treachery, the proof that could expose his plot and prevent a bloody civil war. They had a responsibility, a duty, to deliver that evidence to the king, to warn him of the impending danger. As they rode, Emmeline couldn't shake the image of the locket from her mind, the silver heart with its intertwined initials, the undeniable proof of her mother's secret affair with Alaric. She needed answers. She needed to know the truth about her mother's fate, about her past. "Hugh," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the wind, "we must find my mother. We must find out what happened to her." Hugh nodded, his expression grim. "I know, my lady," he said. "But we must be careful. Alaric's allies are everywhere. We cannot trust anyone." They rode in silence for a while, their thoughts consumed by their own worries and fears. The night was cold and dark, the moon hidden behind a veil of clouds, the stars obscured by the looming mountains. As dawn approached, they found refuge in a small, abandoned shepherd's hut, hidden in a secluded valley. They were exhausted, their bodies aching, their minds numb. They needed rest, but they also needed to plan their next move. They built a small fire, its warmth a welcome comfort in the chilly air. They shared the meager provisions they had brought with them, their conversations sparse and strained. Emmeline couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. She had to know more about Hugh, about his past, about the lost love that haunted him. "Hugh," she said softly, her eyes searching his, "you spoke of a battlefield, of a war you had already fought. Tell me about her, about the woman you loved." Hugh hesitated, his gaze shifting, his expression becoming guarded. He was reluctant to speak of it, to open up the old wounds that had never fully healed. But Emmeline persisted, her voice gentle, her eyes filled with empathy.
"Please," she said.
"I need to understand. I need to know you." Hugh sighed, a long, slow exhalation of breath. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness, a profound sense of loss. "Her name was Alara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was everything to me. My light, my joy, my reason for living." He told her the story, a tale of young love, of passion and devotion, of a bond that had seemed unbreakable. He spoke of Alara's beauty, her kindness, her spirit, her unwavering loyalty. He spoke of their dreams, their plans, their hopes for a future together. But their happiness had been short-lived. War had come, a brutal and bloody conflict that had torn the realm apart. Hugh had been called to serve his lord, to fight for his king, to defend his land. He had left Alara behind, promising to return, to marry her, to build a life together. But he had never seen her again. She had been killed, caught in the crossfire of a senseless battle, her life extinguished before its time. Hugh had returned from the war a broken man, his heart shattered, his dreams turned to ashes. He had vowed never to love again, to dedicate his life to service, to duty, to honor. He had become a knight, a warrior, a shield against the darkness that threatened the realm. But the pain of his loss had never faded, the memory of Alara a constant ache in his soul. He had carried her with him, in his heart, in his mind, in every battle he had fought, in every oath he had sworn. He looked at Emmeline now, his emotions laid bare. His armor, both physical and that which surrounded his heart, removed. And now he stated, quietly looking away, "I find myself here, with you." The echoes of his lost love filled the small space. Emmeline felt a deep sympathy for him, a profound understanding of his pain. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised even herself, that she was falling in love with this broken, honorable knight. Chapter 15. Beneath the Raven's Watch. The revelation of Hugh's past, the story of Alara, hung heavy in the air between them. Emmeline felt a deep empathy for his loss, a poignant understanding of the walls he had built around his heart. Yet, paradoxically, that vulnerability drew her closer to him, forging a connection that transcended their precarious circumstances. They knew they couldn't linger in the shepherd's hut. Alaric's allies would be searching for them, and the isolated location offered little protection. They needed to reach the king, to deliver the evidence of Alaric's treachery, but the journey was fraught with danger. "We need a plan," Emmeline said, her voice firm, her mind already racing, strategizing. "We cannot simply ride to the capital. We will be intercepted, captured, or worse." Hugh nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We need to find someone we can trust," he said. "Someone with influence, someone who can get us an audience with the king without raising suspicion." He paused, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the fire. "There is one possibility," he said slowly. "Lord Gareth, the captain of the guard who brought the message about the wedding." "But he serves Alaric," Emmeline interrupted, her voice filled with doubt. "How can we possibly trust him?" "He served Alaric," Hugh corrected. "But he was also a friend. Before Alaric's ambition consumed him. I believe Gareth's loyalty to the realm is stronger than his loyalty to any one lord." It was a gamble, a desperate hope, but it was the only option they had. They couldn't travel alone, exposed and vulnerable. They needed allies, powerful allies, if they were to succeed. They decided to send a message to Lord Gareth, a carefully worded missive that hinted at Alaric's treachery without revealing too much. They would use a carrier raven, a bird trained to fly to Gareth's stronghold, a remote castle known as Raven's Watch. Hugh wrote the message, his hand steady, his words precise. He attached the message to the raven's leg, a small, feathered messenger carrying their hopes and fears. They released the raven, watching as it soared into the sky, a tiny speck against the vast expanse of the mountains. They could only hope that it would reach its destination, that Gareth would receive their message, and that he would believe them. They spent the next few days in hiding, moving from one secluded location to another, avoiding villages and roads, traveling only under the cover of darkness. They were constantly on edge, their senses alert for any sign of pursuit. The waiting was agonizing, the uncertainty gnawing at their nerves. They had no way of knowing if the raven had reached Gareth, if he had received their message, if he would respond. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a raven arrived, carrying a message from Lord Gareth. The message was brief, cryptic, but encouraging. "Meet me at the Old Oak," it read. 3 days hence, at sunset. The Old Oak was a landmark, a towering tree that stood on the border between Alaric's lands and Gareth's territory. It was a neutral ground, a place where they could meet without raising suspicion. They set out for the Old Oak, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. They were taking a risk, trusting a man who had once served their enemy, but they had no other choice. They reached the Old Oak at sunset, the sky ablaze with color, the air filled with the scent of pine and earth. They waited, their eyes scanning the surrounding landscape, their senses on high alert. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing figure clad in armor, his face stern and watchful. It was Lord Gareth. He approached them, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his eyes assessing them carefully. "Sir Hugh," he said, his voice gruff, "Lady Emmeline, you have taken a great risk coming here." "We had no choice," Hugh said, his voice firm. "We have information that the king must hear. Information about Alaric's treachery." Gareth's expression remained guarded. "Treachery?" he echoed. "What proof do you have?" Hugh produced the pack containing the documents they had taken from Alaric's secret chamber. "This is our proof," he said. "Letters, scrolls, alliances, evidence of Alaric's plot to overthrow the king." Gareth took the pack, his eyes scanning the documents, his expression growing grimmer with each passing moment. "This is damning," he said finally, his voice filled with a quiet fury. "I had suspected Alaric was ambitious, but I never imagined he was capable of such treachery." He looked at Hugh, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and respect. "You have done a great service to the realm, Sir Knight," he said. "And you, my lady, have shown remarkable courage." He paused, his gaze shifting, his expression becoming thoughtful. "I will take you to the king," he said. "But we must be careful. Alaric's allies are powerful, and they will not hesitate to silence anyone who threatens their plans." Emmeline, Hugh, and Gareth stood beneath the ancient oak. 3 figures, representing the conflict that tore the realm apart, but also perhaps the hope that might piece it back together. Chapter 16. The Heart's Confession. The journey to the capital was a perilous undertaking, even with Lord Gareth's protection. They traveled in secret, avoiding major roads and cities, moving under the cover of darkness, constantly on guard against Alaric's spies and assassins. Gareth, with his knowledge of the terrain and his network of loyal men, proved to be an invaluable ally. He guided them through hidden paths, secured safe havens, and provided them with fresh horses and supplies. Despite the constant danger, a sense of camaraderie developed between the 3 of them. They shared stories, fears, and hopes, forging a bond of trust and mutual respect that transcended their different backgrounds and social standings. Emmeline found herself drawn to both men, admiring Gareth's strength and integrity, and deepening her feelings for Hugh, whose quiet courage and unwavering loyalty touched her heart in ways she had never thought possible. One evening, as they camped in a secluded forest clearing, the conversation turned to more personal matters. Gareth, having witnessed the undeniable connection between Emmeline and Hugh, spoke with a gentle curiosity. "Sir Hugh," he said, his voice soft, "you have spoken of your duty, of your loyalty to the realm. But what of your heart? What of your own desires? Hugh hesitated, his gaze shifting to Emmeline, his expression filled with a mixture of longing and fear. He had kept his feelings hidden, buried beneath layers of duty and self-denial, but Gareth's question had forced him to confront them. "My heart," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "is torn." He looked at Emmeline, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that she had never seen before. He saw her bravery, her kindness, her fire. "I have sworn an oath," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "to serve my king, to protect the realm. But I have also developed feelings for Lady Emmeline. Feelings that I know are forbidden." Emmeline's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected his feelings, had hoped for them, but to hear him speak them aloud, to confess his love in such a vulnerable and honest way, filled her with a mixture of joy and trepidation. She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a love that she could no longer deny. She had come to admire his strength, his courage, his integrity, but it was his vulnerability, his willingness to open his heart, that had truly captured her. "Hugh," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "my heart is also torn. I was betrothed to another, destined for a life I did not desire. But then I met you, and everything changed." She reached out, her hand touching his, a silent expression of her love, her trust, her commitment. "I know the risks," she continued, her voice firm. "I know the dangers we face. But I would rather face them with you than live a life without you." Hugh's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of joy and relief. He had carried the burden of his love in silence, fearing rejection, fearing the consequences of his feelings. But Emmeline's confession had lifted that burden, freeing him to embrace the love that had blossomed between them. He gently squeezed her hand, their connection electric. "My lady," Emmeline, he stated softly. Gareth, witnessing this intimate exchange, smiled warmly. "It seems," he said, "that love has found a way, even amidst the chaos and turmoil of our world." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "But remember," he said, "the dangers are still real. Alaric's allies are powerful, and they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals. We must remain vigilant. We must remain united, if we are to succeed." Emmeline and Hugh nodded, their hearts filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They had confessed their love, they had found solace in each other's arms, but they knew that their journey was far from over. They had a duty to fulfill, a realm to save, a future to secure. And they would face it together, their love a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. Their hearts, for the moment, had spoken. Now, duty had to be served. Chapter 17. A Storm of Swords. The final leg of their journey to the capital was the most treacherous. They were entering territory heavily influenced by Alaric's allies, where spies lurked in every shadow and danger threatened at every turn. Gareth, using his extensive network of contacts, arranged for them to travel in disguise, posing as simple merchants, their true identities concealed beneath rough clothing and assumed names. They moved swiftly and silently, avoiding contact with anyone they didn't trust, their senses constantly on alert. The tension was palpable, the fear of discovery a constant weight on their shoulders. But they pressed on, driven by their determination to reach the king, to expose Alaric's treachery, and to secure their own future. As they neared the capital, the landscape changed, the dense forests and rugged mountains giving way to rolling hills and sprawling farmland. The city itself, a magnificent spectacle of towering walls, gleaming spires, and bustling streets, rose before them, a beacon of hope and a symbol of the power they were challenging. Gareth led them through the city gates, using his authority as a respected lord to bypass the usual scrutiny. They made their way through the crowded streets, a maze of merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, and commoners, their senses overwhelmed by the sights, sounds, and smells of the bustling metropolis. Gareth had arranged for them to stay in a secluded inn, a place known for its discretion and its loyalty to the crown. They were given a private room, a safe haven where they could rest and prepare for their audience with the king. But their respite was short-lived. As they were settling into their room, A commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Shouts, the clang of steel, the unmistakable sounds of battle. Gareth rushed to the window, his face grim. "We've been betrayed," he said. "Alaric's men have found us." Emmeline and Hugh exchanged a look of grim determination. They had known this moment might come, had prepared themselves for the inevitable confrontation. They were trapped, outnumbered, but they would not surrender. They would fight. Hugh drew his sword, its polished steel gleaming in the dim light. "We must reach the king," he said. "He is our only hope." Gareth nodded, his own sword drawn. "Follow me," he said. "I know a secret passage that leads to the palace." They left the inn, fighting their way through the courtyard, a whirlwind of steel and fury. Alaric's men were numerous and well-armed, but Hugh, Gareth, and Emmeline fought with a courage and determination born of desperation and love. Emmeline, wielding the dagger she had carried since her flight from Hymir, proved to be a surprisingly formidable opponent. She was no warrior, but she was a lady of Hymir, and she would not cower in the face of danger. She fought with a fierce protectiveness, driven by her love for Hugh, her determination to expose Alaric's treachery, her yearning for freedom. They reached the secret passage, a narrow, dark tunnel that led beneath the city walls, a hidden escape route known only to a few. They slipped through the entrance, leaving behind the chaos and clamor of the battle, entering a world of silence and shadows. But even in the darkness, danger lurked. Alaric's men had anticipated their escape, and they were waiting for them in the tunnel. The fight in the confined space was brutal and desperate. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and blood, the silence broken only by the clang of steel, the grunts of exertion, the cries of pain. Hugh fought like a man possessed, his sword a blur of motion, his strength and skill unmatched. He cut down one opponent after another, his determination fueled by his love for Emmeline, his loyalty to the realm, his burning desire for justice. Gareth fought beside him, his own skill and courage a testament to his years of service to the crown. He protected their flanks, covered their retreat, his experience and leadership invaluable in the chaotic melee. Emmeline, despite her lack of training, fought with a fierce determination, her dagger flashing in the darkness, her movements quick and agile. She defended herself, protected Hugh, her spirit unbroken, her resolve unwavering. They fought their way through the tunnel, inch by inch, their bodies bruised and battered, their strength waning. But they pressed on, driven by their hope, their love, their duty. They reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into a small, hidden courtyard within the palace walls. They had made it. They were inside the palace. But their ordeal was far from over. The courtyard was filled with soldiers, loyal to the king, but unaware of their presence, unaware of their mission. They were surrounded, outnumbered, their fate hanging in the balance. The storm of swords had brought them to the king, but it was far from over. Chapter 18. The Lioness's Roar. The king's soldiers, seeing 3 armed figures emerge from a secret passage, immediately surrounded them, their swords drawn, their faces wary. Gareth, recognizing the captain of the guard, stepped forward, his voice commanding. "Stand down," he ordered. "We are here on the king's business." The captain hesitated, his eyes scanning the 3 figures, his gaze lingering on Hugh's bloodied sword and Emmeline's disheveled appearance. He was unsure, suspicious, but Gareth's authority was undeniable. "Lord Gareth," he said, his voice hesitant, "what is the meaning of this? Who are these people?" "This is Sir Hugh Fitzalan," Gareth said, "a knight of renowned skill and loyalty. And this," he gestured towards Emmeline, "is Lady Emmeline of Hymir." The captain's eyes widened in surprise. He recognized the names, the stories of the runaway bride, and the knight who had pursued her. But he was still wary, unsure of their intentions. "They claim to have information for the king," Gareth continued. "Information about a plot against the crown. A plot led by Lord Alaric." The captain's face paled. Alaric was a powerful lord, a close advisor to the king. To accuse him of treachery was a serious matter, one that could have dire consequences. "This is a grave accusation," Lord Gareth, he said, his voice trembling. Do you have proof? Hugh stepped forward, producing the pack containing the documents they had taken from Alaric's secret chamber.
This is our proof, he said.
Letters, scrolls, alliances, evidence of Alaric's plot to overthrow the king and ignite a civil war. The captain took the pack, his hands shaking. He examined the documents, his eyes widening in disbelief, his face growing grimmer with each passing moment. This is treason, he whispered, his voice filled with horror. We must inform the king immediately. He turned to his men, his voice regaining its authority. Escort these three to the king's chambers, he ordered, and summon the royal council. We have a matter of grave importance to discuss. They were led through the palace corridors, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors, their hearts pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. They were about to face the king, to present their evidence, to expose Alaric's treachery. Their fate and the fate of the realm hung in the balance. They reached the king's chambers, a magnificent hall adorned with tapestries, banners, and portraits of past rulers. The king, a stern-faced man with a crown of silver hair and piercing blue eyes, sat on a throne at the far end of the room, surrounded by his advisors, his court, his loyal knights. The captain of the guard announced their arrival, his voice echoing through the hall. Your Majesty, he said, Lord Gareth, Sir Hugh Fitzalan, and Lady Emmeline of Hymir seek an audience. They claim to have information of vital importance to the crown. The king's eyes fixed on them, his gaze intense, assessing. He gestured for them to approach. They knelt before the throne, their heads bowed, their hearts pounding. Hugh presented the pack containing the documents to the king, his voice clear and steady. Your Majesty, he said, we have uncovered evidence of a plot against your crown. A plot led by Lord Alaric, who seeks to overthrow you and plunge the realm into war. The king took the pack, his hands trembling slightly. He examined the documents, his eyes narrowing, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. The hall was silent, the tension palpable. The fate of the realm hung in the balance, resting on the king's judgment, on his ability to discern the truth from the lies. After what seemed like an eternity, the king looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fury and resolve. This is treason, he said, his voice a low growl that echoed through the hall. Alaric has betrayed my trust, betrayed his oath, betrayed his people. He turned to his advisors, his voice rising in anger. Summon Alaric's allies, he ordered. Arrest them, question them, expose their treachery. We will crush this rebellion before it can take root. But Emmeline, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, a lioness's roar that surprised even herself. Your Majesty, she said, there is more. Alaric did not act alone. He had accomplices, powerful figures who aided and abetted his plot. She revealed the story of her mother, of the locket, of Alaric's secret affair and her mother's supposed death. She spoke of the lies, the deception, the manipulation that had shaped her life, that had threatened the stability of the realm. The king listened, his eyes widening in shock, his expression filled with a mixture of disbelief and horror. He realized the depth of Alaric's treachery, the extent of his cruelty, the magnitude of the threat he posed. He had believed the realm was safe, secure. He had been blind. Bring me every traitor, he declared, his voice raw. Every enemy, every conspirator. Emmeline, having spoken her truth, felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She looked at Hugh. It was done. Or so they thought. Chapter 19. Blood and Redemption. The king's decree sparked a wave of arrests and interrogations, sweeping through the court like a wildfire. Alaric's allies, caught off guard and exposed, were swiftly apprehended, their power and influence crumbling before the weight of the evidence against them. The court, once a haven of intrigue and whispered conspiracies, became a scene of chaos and fear as those who had secretly supported Alaric's plot were dragged before the king's justice. But the uncovering of Alaric's treachery did not bring peace. It ignited a conflict, a struggle for power that threatened to tear the realm apart. Those loyal to Alaric, Those who had benefited from his patronage refused to surrender. They rallied their forces, raised their banners, and prepared to fight for their cause, for their ambition, for their survival. The realm was plunged into civil war, a bloody and brutal conflict that pitted brother against brother, friend against friend, loyalty against betrayal. The land was ravaged by battles, sieges, and skirmishes, the air filled with the cries of the wounded, the stench of death, the lament of the innocent. Hugh, despite his love for Emmeline and his desire for a peaceful future, could not stand idly by. He was a knight, sworn to defend the realm, to protect the king, to uphold justice. He donned his armor, drew his sword, and rode to war, his heart heavy with the burden of duty, his spirit fueled by a fierce determination to end the conflict, to restore peace, to secure a future for himself and for Emmeline. Emmeline, too, refused to remain passive. She was a lady of Hymir, a woman of courage and resilience, and she would not cower in the face of danger. She used her influence, her knowledge of the court, her connections, to support the king's cause, to rally the loyalists, to provide aid and comfort to the wounded, to work tirelessly for peace. She also continued her search for her mother, determined to uncover the truth about her fate, to bring her home, to heal the wounds of the past. She followed every lead, every clue, every whisper, her hope a flickering flame in the darkness of war. The war raged for months, a seemingly endless cycle of violence and destruction. Battles were fought, lives were lost, and the realm teetered on the brink of collapse. But slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. The king's forces, bolstered by Hugh's leadership and Emmeline's unwavering support, gained the upper hand. Alaric's allies, weakened by internal divisions and dwindling resources, began to falter. The final battle took place on the fields of Hymir, the very land where Emmeline's journey had begun, the very place where her freedom had been threatened. It was a brutal and bloody clash, a desperate struggle for control of the realm, a test of loyalty, courage, and determination. Hugh fought like a man possessed, his sword a whirlwind of steel, his strength and skill unmatched. He cut down enemy after enemy, his heart filled with a righteous fury, his mind focused on victory, on peace, on a future with Emmeline. Emmeline, watching from the castle walls, her heart pounding with fear and hope, prayed for his safety, for the safety of all those who fought for the king, for the future of the realm. As the battle raged, a messenger arrived, bearing news that would change everything. Emmeline's mother had been found. She was alive, held captive in a remote fortress, a prisoner of one of Alaric's most loyal supporters. She had been kept hidden, silenced, her existence erased from the records, her fate a secret known only to a few. Emmeline, torn between her duty to the war effort and her desperate desire to see her mother, made a difficult decision. She would leave the battle, ride to the fortress, and rescue her mother. She entrusted the war effort to Hugh, to Gareth, to the king's loyal forces, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew the risks, she knew the dangers, but she could not abandon her mother. She rode through the night, her heart pounding with anticipation, her mind racing with possibilities. She reached the fortress at dawn, its imposing walls a stark reminder of the power she was challenging. She found her mother, weak and frail, but alive. Their reunion was a torrent of tears, of relief, of shared grief, and unspoken forgiveness. But their escape was not easy. Alaric's loyalists, desperate and cornered, fought fiercely to prevent their escape. Emmeline, armed with only a dagger and her unwavering determination, fought alongside her mother, their combined strength of force to be reckoned with. They escaped the fortress, their freedom hard-won, their future uncertain. But they were together, mother and daughter, reunited after years of separation, their bond stronger than ever. As they rode back to Hymir, they saw the aftermath of the battle. The fields were strewn with the dead and wounded, the air filled with the stench of smoke and blood. But the fighting was over. The king's forces had prevailed. The rebellion had been crushed. Hugh was alive. Wounded but alive. The realm was safe.
Peace had been restored, but the cost had been high.
Blood had been spilled, but the hope of redemption now filled the air. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. The war was over, but the scars remained, etched deep into the land and the hearts of its people. Hymir, once a symbol of noble pride and ancient lineage, now bore the marks of battle, its walls scarred, its fields stained with blood. But amidst the devastation, a sense of renewal emerged, a fragile hope for a future free from the tyranny of Alaric and his followers. Emmeline, reunited with her mother, found solace and strength in their shared experiences. The years of separation, the lies and deception, had taken their toll, but the bond between mother and daughter proved unbreakable. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, healing old wounds, and forging a new, stronger connection. Hugh, recovering from his injuries, was hailed as a hero, his courage and leadership instrumental in securing the king's victory. He was offered titles, lands, and honors, but he refused them all, his heart set on a simpler life, a life with Emmeline. He sought her out, finding her in the castle gardens, a place that had once been a symbol of her confinement, but now represented a haven of peace and tranquility. He approached her hesitantly, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He had confessed his love before, amidst the chaos of war, but now, in the quiet aftermath, he needed to know if her feelings remained the same. "Emmeline," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion, "the war is over. The realm is safe. But what of us?" Emmeline turned to face him, her eyes filled with a love that had deepened and matured through their shared trials. She had admired his strength, his courage, his unwavering loyalty, but it was his vulnerability, his willingness to sacrifice everything for her, that had truly captured her heart. "Hugh," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "my heart has not changed. It belongs to you, as it always has, as it always will." Hugh's face lit up with a joy that erased the lines of weariness and pain. He reached out, taking her hands in his touch gentle and reassuring. "I love you, Emmeline," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity that touched her soul. "I love you more than words can express. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Emmeline's eyes filled with tears, tears of joy, of relief, of a love that had endured through hardship and uncertainty. "Yes, Hugh," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating as one. They had faced danger, betrayal, and war, but their love had survived, stronger and more resilient than ever. But their future was not without its challenges. The king, grateful for their service, had offered Hugh a position of power and influence in the court. It was an honor, a recognition of his abilities, but it also meant a life of duty, of responsibility, of potential separation from Emmeline. They discussed their options, weighing the demands of duty against their desire for a life together. They knew that they could not simply abandon the realm, not after all they had fought for, not after all the sacrifices they had made. But they also knew that their love was precious, a beacon of hope in a world still recovering from the ravages of war. They needed to find a way to balance their love and their duty, to create a future that honored both their personal desires and their responsibilities to the realm. In the end, they reached a decision, a compromise that reflected their shared values and their commitment to each other. Hugh would accept a position in the King's Council, but he would also maintain his ties to Hymir, ensuring that he and Emmeline could spend time together, building a life that blended their public duties with their private happiness. The reckoning of love and duty had been reached, a balance struck between the demands of the realm and the desires of their hearts. They had faced the storm, survived the battle, and emerged stronger, their love a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The wedding, a small ceremony, would be in the spring. Epilogue. Spring arrived at Hymir, painting the scarred landscape with vibrant hues of green and gold. The fields, once stained with blood, now bloomed with wildflowers, a testament to the resilience of nature and the enduring hope for renewal. The castle, its walls repaired and its banners flying high, stood as a symbol of strength and stability, a beacon of peace in a realm slowly healing from the wounds of war. The wedding of Lady Emmeline of Highmere and Sir Hugh Fitzalan was not a grand, ostentatious affair, as befitted their noble status. It was, instead, a simple, intimate ceremony held in the castle chapel, witnessed by family, close friends, and those who had fought alongside them in the war. Emmeline, radiant in a gown of white silk, her hair adorned with wildflowers, walked down the aisle on the arm of her mother, their bond stronger than ever, their past reconciled, their future filled with hope. Hugh, standing at the altar, his eyes filled with a love that transcended words, watched her approach, his heart overflowing with joy and gratitude. They exchanged vows, simple words that spoke volumes of their commitment, their loyalty, their enduring love. They exchanged rings, simple bands of gold, symbols of a bond that had been forged in the crucible of war, tested by betrayal and danger, and strengthened by their shared courage and unwavering devotion. Gareth, standing beside Hugh as his best man, smiled warmly, his heart filled with a sense of satisfaction and relief. He had played his part in bringing them together, in helping them navigate the treacherous paths of courtly intrigue and war, and he was honored to witness their union. The king, unable to attend due to the ongoing efforts to rebuild the realm, sent his blessings and a generous gift, a testament to his gratitude for their service and his recognition of their love. After the ceremony, a small feast was held in the castle's great hall, a celebration of love, loyalty, and the triumph of good over evil. There was music, laughter, and heartfelt toasts, a joyful gathering of those who had survived the storm and emerged stronger, their bonds forged in the fires of adversity. Emmeline and Hugh, surrounded by their loved ones, felt a sense of peace and contentment they had never known before. They had faced their challenges, overcome their obstacles, and found their way to each other, their love a beacon of hope in a world still recovering from the ravages of war. As the evening drew to a close, they stole away to the castle gardens, the place where their love had blossomed amidst the chaos and uncertainty. They walked hand in hand, their silence filled with unspoken understanding, their hearts overflowing with gratitude and love. They looked out over the land, the rolling hills and verdant fields bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The realm was healing, peace was returning, and their future stretched before them, filled with promise and possibility. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale castle, but in the real world, a world of challenges and complexities, of love and duty, of sacrifice and redemption. They had learned that true love was not a passive emotion, but an active force, a commitment to stand by each other, to support each other, to fight for each other, through whatever life might bring. They stood there for a long moment, together. And in that moment they knew they were home.